Hello and welcome to Year 5, Issue 6 of the Geeky Brummie Podcast. I'm your stand-in host, Keith Bloomfield, while Ryan takes a few welcome days off. And joining me on this issue is Leigh Price.
Hello.
And Matt Lovell.
Hello.
Later we'll be talking about the recent Netflix film The Mitchells vs. the Machines. We'll be taking a look at some of the newest trailers and we'll be each recommending you one of our favourite geeky books. So stay tuned and we'll be back soon.
What's happening to you these days? Having lots of fun? Believe me, I know some folks that are in for some fun.
Take a minute. See what's in it.
But you can see how dangerous this could be.
But first, we're going to have a little fun tonight, folks.
It's time for the Geeky Brummie Podcast.
So it's been a few weeks since we were last with you on your podcasting service of choice. So it's time to catch up with what everybody's been up to. And first of all, we're going to go to Mr. Matt Lovell. Matt, what have you been up to?
Hello. For me, it's been quite busy at work. But in terms of actual geekery, I purchased Resident Evil 8 Village. I wasn't going to, but then I thought, you know what, actually, screw it, I'm going to do it. And I'm really enjoying it. I'm 2 to 3 hours into the game. And one thing I will say off the bat is Capcom have optimized it really, really well for PC. I'm running a 960 graphics card, and it still runs incredibly well. It's a bit choppy here and there, but for a game as visually impressive as Resident Evil 8, they've done a really good job optimizing it.
I have actually seen a guy called Low Spec Gamer did actually point out just how good it is at like scaling down. So yeah. I have heard about this.
Honestly, yeah, because I was going to hold off getting it. But then obviously with all the PC crisis going on, I was like, you know what, screw it, I'll do it. It's definitely easier than Resident Evil 7, but it's the story is really interesting. All the characters are really interesting. And also I like how it's subtly changed a little bit more towards action. So things like the enemies drop a few items here and there, but they've not gone too far the other way. You know, Chris Redfield punching a boulder, tear, ridiculous. It's got a nice balance. And actually, given the setting is quite it's quite fantasy this time in terms of you've got werewolves, vampires, etc. It's quite interesting, without any spoilers, how they're actually working it back into the Resident Evil ridiculous megavirus narrative. So overall, hats off to them.
Have you encountered the infamous lady vampire yet?
Tall vampire lady.
I have. I'm also very familiar with the Thomas Tank Engine mod as well for the tall vampire lady, and it is so worth it.
Have you seen the baby mod as well?
Replacing the baby's head with Chris Redfield.
Yes, Chris Redfield. It's the best thing.
And I just find it's a beautiful thing when modders get together, and the fact that within days you have a baby head Chris Redfield.
Mm-hmm. It's the only downside that when I do get around to it, I'll be playing it on console, so I won't get any of that fun elements.
It's okay. I'm sure you can get paid DLC. Paid DLC Chris Babyhead.
Anything else outside of Resident Evil?
Not really. It's been with work, we're returned to events and opening back up, which is obviously very exciting, but it also means I currently don't have a life.
Well, if you've got Resident Evil 8, what else do you need, really?
If I've got a 9-foot lady stalking me in high heels around a big castle in Romania, I don't need anything else in my life, really.
I've liked some of the Twitter memes that have been hitting of like me trying to escape from the vampire lady. Everyone's going, yeah, well, I'm just gonna get caught. It's fine. It's like,
yeah, there's the one with the video of the guy running down the beach, like, oh no, don't catch me.
And it's just, I just love how Capcom and Japan in general managed to capture everyone's weirdest fantasies but I managed to tease it out of everyone. They didn't know that's what they wanted, but it is.
I feel bad that I'm thinking it's been a while since I've played a Resident Evil game, but I do quite fancy this one. But I don't want it to be seen for the wrong reasons. It's like it looks like a good game. It's not about a giant vampire lady at all. It's like no. Although I think when I looked to see a particular online store, how much the price was of that and whether I could get it cheaper in my local Argos. There were some very interesting products available on that store, featuring this large vampire lady in a state of serious undress. And I was kind of like, this is not what I was expecting from a major online retailer. It's quite strange. What about you, Leigh? What have you been up to over the past couple of weeks?
I've actually been playing a game with a different tall vampire lady because I started up on a whim, decided to play Code Vein on Game Pass, which is basically anime Dark Souls. And so my character is the tall vampire lady because I flipped a coin. What gender am I going to be? Okay, I'm going to be a woman. And then she's tall just because the height slider at the beginning of the game provides zero context for how tall your character actually is going to be. So as soon as the game loaded up and like she's towering over every other female character, I was like, well, can't change that now. She also has a massive hat as well, but I made it like bright red, so it's just Carmen Sandiego's hat. And basically the entire outfit was like, okay, this is about vampires in a Dark Souls type world. Goth as possible, 4 capes. Just go all the capes, just all black with red trim. That's what we're doing. But yeah, I played it just on a whim, just curious to see if I actually enjoyed it or not. And I'm still playing it a week later. So it's the first time I've ever played through a Souls-like as well. So it's been an experience getting to see an actual Souls-like, even if it's not one of FromSoft's games. But I've actually gotten quite far into it, surprisingly. I've managed to get good quite quickly, so I'm proud of. It's a really interesting world though, because it's like a post-apocalyptic thing where everyone's now a vampire, and they're trying to find these trees that produce blood, and it's all very weird and anime, and it's great, but it is just a lot of fun to play as well. So.
I was going to say, because I've heard quite a lot of good things about it, but every time I've gone to look at the trailers, it's just been one of your typical anime game trailers where it just says absolutely nothing. Everyone's just got really cool hair and they're just flying around everywhere, and I'm just like, I don't actually know what this game is about.
It's a very weird one, and it does have some of the problems with being an anime game. Like, namely how it treats its female characters and how it frames those female characters. Like, there's one bit where someone's talking about, like, a scientific experiment that led towards all this, and it's very serious, but the camera decides the best place to go is right here, just right on her chest. And I'm like, why do you need to be there? She's not even wearing, like, a skimpy outfit. She's dressed like a scientist. And he's just like, so it's a lab coat and a top, and it's just like, why are you doing that? Stop doing it.
Do they have the stereotypical really squeaky high voices as well?
No.
Or the obligatory? Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, and there isn't an obnoxious mascot character either. Which, to be fair, I think would honestly kind of kill the vibe of the game, because it is very gothic and very dark. But like, not visually dark. Like, there's actually quite a lot of areas that look very bright and colourful, surprisingly. So, like, there's an area that's sort of bathed in, like, sunset and all this sort of stuff, and it looks great. And there's a cathedral area that's all very well lit and everything, but, like, the whole kind of feel of it is very dark, just because it's post-apocalyptic and it's vampires and all this sort of stuff. But yeah, having a lot of fun with it, and maybe now I might actually look at getting Dark Souls now that I'm enjoying it. What about you, Keith? What have you been up to?
Strangely, in a fashion that we must all be doing the same. I have just finished a game called Genesis Noir, which is from developer Feral Cat Den and publisher Fellow Traveller. Just because I'm putting off buying Pokemon Snap and Resident Evil 8 for a little while. But I was quite surprised. I quite liked it. I've been playing a couple of these kind of more indie games, and there was just something about the design of Genesis Knight that I quite liked. It was kind of like hand drawn 2D animation. I had to get over the idea that it started off with this kind of jazz tinged environment. But it was great. It was kind of it's very linear. There's not really an awful lot to do. There's very simple puzzles to be solved. But I did quite like when it got towards the end of the game. It kind of went a bit psychedelic and kind of ended in a very unexpected way, which I really enjoyed. I kind of got quite a lot out of that game. So I kind of recommend it. I think it's on a few different platforms if you haven't seen it. It's definitely worth a playthrough. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I've seen it around, and it's like kind of a weird jazz odyssey, like involving the Big Bang or something like that. And
yeah,
it's
there's all this science stuff about the origins of the universe and kind of like multiple dimensions, and it's kind of cool. It's actually it
looks interesting, but I have absolutely no idea what's going on. So
I think it's definitely worth a playthrough if you get the opportunity. And because I'm still waiting to get Resident Evil 8 and Pokemon Snap, I then moved on to another game called Rain on Your Parade, which just sounded great because you're just a cloud who rains on everybody, ruin their days. And that's kind of interesting because it's kind of got 3D graphic parts, but the actual cloud itself is like a two-dimensional cardboard cutout. You just fly on strings around the sky. So I've got through that a little bit, which is quite funny. You just rain on stuff to ruin things. So I'm going to try and give that a playthrough, and hopefully by the time I finish that, I'll be in a position that I can get a hold of Pokemon Snap first, and then Resident Evil 8. I think that's the way I'll do it. That's the way
I'm looking to get Pokemon Snap at some point soon. But,
I just hope the price stays down. Argos is the place to go. Cheapest price available at the moment. Other stores are available. And then I was quite pleased. I was quite pleased that Inside Number 9 started up again on TV. The Reece Shearsmith, Steve Templeton show, which is just brilliant. In a half an hour, they do more than most dramas do. Not looking at you, Line of Duty, but it has its flaws. So I was quite pleased that was back. I think this first episode was a bit of a a divisive one, but I kind of liked it because it had a very Reservoir Dogs vibe about it, and mixed with Shakespearean and a couple of other kind of like theatrical tropes. But that was really good, so I'm hoping the rest of the series is as good as all the previous ones.
Yeah, I feel like I'm one of the only people who hasn't watched Inside Number 9 because I hear so much about it, but I've never actually seen it.
It's same as you, Keith. I love it. I think it's really, really good. There are obviously some, because they're sort of anthologies, they're self-contained stories. There are some kind of a lot weaker ones, but then there's also some absolute standout ones like 12 Days of Christine, which is like still one of the best pieces of television I've ever seen, like hands down. And it's got the sort of trademark League of Gentlemen black humor. It just works really well.
If you haven't seen it, you've got 5 seasons with this 6th one just starting. They did a live Halloween special 1 year as well, which was quite brilliant.
Did hear a lot about that, yeah.
Yeah, it was harking back to the days of the Mike Smith fronted one, Ghostwatch, in that kind of sense. Yeah. So it was a bit of a kind of meta thing, but that was really good. It's definitely worth watching. And like Matt says, like if the one doesn't, if you don't like one, there's going to be another one that you'll find something to do, which is kind of cool. So coming up in the rest of the show, of course, you'll have both mine and Leigh's comics and game roundups. But next up, we're going to be talking about Mitchells versus the Machines. So recently out on Netflix is The Mitchells versus the Machines. This is the directorial debut of Mike Ronda, coming out of Sony Pictures Animation. It's a film that's also co-directed by Jeff Rowe and has been produced by Phil Lord, Chris Miller and Carl Ulbrecht, who people might know from previously being involved a lot in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. This particular film features a voice cast including Abby Jacobson, Daniel Bride, Maya Rudolph, Eric Andre, Olivia Colman, Fred Armisen, Beck Bennett, and John Legend is in the cast there. So it was originally planned to hit cinemas in the kind of tail end of 2020, but has now come out on Netflix. So we're just going to kind of see what people thought of this new movie. So we'll go with Leigh this time. What did you think?
I really loved this movie. Just the whole time I was just laughing. It's just such a fun movie. Like every part of it, I cannot think of a bit that I didn't like. It's just it. I mean, first of all, the animation is stunning. Like it looks amazing. It's because it's kind of combined a variety of styles, it feels like, but it all kind of gels together really nicely, and it kind of just the character designs are great, and I love that sort of style of character. And just I think the kind of central themes of like family and technology going too far were both kind of handled really well. Like they didn't kind of go technology is bad. It wasn't like Black Mirror where what if phones but too much. It was there's still like an element of like technology can do all this good stuff, but there is a point where it can go too far, and I thought that it's just such a fun time.
I completely agree. I think things like the voice cast, like Abby Jacobson, I first found her like with Disenchanted, and I thought she was really good in that, and I'm glad to see her in like a big film, because she really does play her characters really, really well, and she gets the humor as well. She's very good at dropping in little hints there and like here and there of humor. And you've also got was it Fred Armisen, who is obviously quite big in his own right with things like Portmanteau, and he voiced Kevin in Final Space, who I absolutely loved his character, however annoying he was. But also I think one of the big wins for me was the soundtrack. So both the original score was a really nice mix of sort of your standard sort of instrumental sort of movie music, but then they weave a lot of sort of synth and that kind of thing in whenever there's more sort of like scenes talk about tech or robots, that kind of thing. And I agree. I think they handled the subject matter a lot quite well compared to sort of others kind of in the genre. And for me, one of the very sort of like really subtle but really nice bits that stood out for me is there's a very subtle LGBTQ plus theme running throughout the film, and it's not laboured. There's no like massive zoom in on it, and as far as I'm aware, in the marketing, that kind of thing, they've not kind of used that as a hook either. It's very subtle, and you could miss it. And I just quite like that's a nice kind of way of representing it. It's normalizing that kind of thing quite well.
Yeah, I did actually pick up on it, and I just kind of went, huh, okay, that was there the whole time. I only noticed it right at the end of the movie. I was like, oh yeah, well, okay, cool, that's fine.
Yeah, it's one of the film's great strengths that it does a lot of things, but it doesn't labor it. It doesn't push it into people. It doesn't go, hey, look at me, we're talking about these particular subjects. It just lets the characters be who they are, and you connect with the characters. And although it has the kind of the overall basic premise of like father-daughter familiar relationships, it plays with it within a kind of modern sensibility. It's kind of, these are what families are like these nowadays. It's like, there are generational gaps, there are differences between how people view technology. Obviously in the film, the daughter is into films and making animations and does some great stuff with her pug dog. I think it's a pug. Is it? Or is it a
dog
sausage?
pig?
Yeah, I think so. And then the dad's kind of very not anti-technology, but not technology savvy, and likes the outdoors.
He's an outdoorsman, yeah.
Yeah, and so it kind of uses that as the crux to kind of generate the conflict, but also then how the family gels together and how the mom kind of plays that bridging role, and it's very traditional in many senses, but also very progressive. I thought it was very much a kind of film of the 21st century.
I did enjoy how they handled the dad's ineptitude with technology, because it's just like I think we all know someone of that kind of age group who's just that inept with technology. Who just panics as soon as they see a screen, you know.
It made me feel bad though, because like that I'm the dad character now. It's like I'm in that demographic of that's what it is, because it's very much, you know, the kids were very much in a similar kind of age range to what my own kids are, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm the Danny McBride dad character now. It's like I'm not the cool John Legend dad. I'm kind of bumbling. I'm not quite good. A bit useless around the house dad. But yeah, it's great. And the whole kind of one of the other highlights for me was Olivia Colman as the voice of Pal.
Oh yeah,
which was just brilliant.
There was a point where she started talking, and I was just like, I know that voice, and immediately looked at the cast list and went, oh okay, well, I did not expect that, but I'm fine with Olivia Colman being the villain in this.
I think the fact that the sort of Steve Jobs type character was called Mark as well. I kept getting Peep Show vibes though. That's how I did the same thing. I looked it up because every time she said Mark, I was like, I know that Mark. I know that Mark sound.
That would have been a completely different movie.
It's funny you mentioned that character as well, because when I was looking it up while watching the movie, I saw Eric Andre's name as soon as he started talking in that scene, and I went, oh yeah, that is Eric Andre. But just straight away.
Yeah, I think it's a really good film, and it's a good pedigree as well, because like you said, like Into the Spider-Verse was fantastic, like absolutely phenomenal, and also they did Lego Movie as well, which again it's a kids film done right, where it's not too ridiculous that other people can't enjoy it, but there's enough to keep the kids sort of engaged, and there's enough sort of like references and that kind of thing to keep it engaging but not too forced.
Yeah, I think it doesn't fall into that usual trap that some animated films do, that are too now, and kind of like in a few years' time it won't play to the audiences because it's either too hip with the voice cast, or it's all down to one song that was big in the charts at the time. But I think it's a film that will bear repeat viewing and get new viewers as time goes on, because it's kind of a bit timeless, perhaps in 10-15 years maybe when technology's moved on again. But it was like, and there's lots to take in the background detail, and I think that is something they did so spectacularly with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, was that mix of animation styles. With that one, it was the difference between the various spider people. But in this, just that mix of kind of 3D animation, elements of 2D animation, using the sound effects.
It did feel like with the actual character animation, it felt very stop motion. Like the actual, like especially like with the robots and stuff, they felt very CG, but the family felt very stop motion. And I think I kind of feel like that helped highlight the difference and like how unusual they are within this world, like especially with the dad kind of being the old-fashioned type and having him kind of animated in that stop motion style kind of played that up a little bit, and I quite liked that.
That's a really good point, and I think it's nice. I think it's a good example of how you can still innovate animated movies, because obviously now it's kind of the norm to do sort of CGI animated movies, but the fact they're blending different styles, kind of similar to what, you know, Scott Pilgrim meant to me all those years ago, where they sort of blended a lot of different styles together quite seamlessly. So even though it was still live action, it had a lot.
There's definitely like a similarity there, because like you'd have little things pop up on screen that were like hand drawn. And it's kind of similar to how Scott Pilgrim did, like just little captions and little video game things popping up on screen. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it goes to show that like companies and studios are investing in, rather than just kind of like quick money grabbing kids films, you know, Pixar have definitely got competition now when it comes to, high quality animated movies. Both the Lego movies, even things like the How to Train Your Dragon series, which was DreamWorks, but Sony now have got, they've got racked up a couple of, good, interesting, dynamic, well animated, well directed, and films that appeal to everybody, not just kids. I think I got a lot out of this movie, and like Leigh, there's so much to laugh at in there. It's funny without being childish or juvenile. It's like, yeah, this is
it was the whole sequence in the mall that got me. It just escalated so much and just got weirder and weirder, and I was just loving every minute of it.
I take it we're all going to say that this is a film we recommend everybody checks out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So if we've won you over with our thoughts on the Mitchells versus the Machines, it's streaming now on Netflix. Now we take a look at some comics out now and coming soon in the pull list. Out now, we have The Dreaming Waking Hours number 10 from DC's Black Label. This is written by G. Willow Wilson with art by M.K. Perker and Nick Robles. In this issue, the new ruler of the Kingdom of Fairy stands revealed, and it's Nula. She may be one of the most beloved characters in the Sandman mythos, but she sure does seem, how shall we say this, different. And amidst this chaos, what secret from Heather After's past will re-emerge when she needs it most? Next week we have Black Knight, Curse of the Ebony Blade number 3 from Marvel Comics, written by Simon Spurrier with art by Sergio Fernandez de Villa. In this issue, the mighty Thor versus the Black Knight. Dane Whitman wields the magical Ebony Blade as the Black Knight. He needs Elsa Bloodstone's help if he's going to stop an enemy's murderous hunt for the ebony artifacts. But the Ebony Chalice lies beyond this world, in a wasteland of dangerous fantasies and predatory magic. Their battle in the present will reveal dangerous secrets of the past as the mighty Thor duels the first Black Knight at Camelot. The Chalice's power, like the Ebony Blades, comes at a terrible cost. Is Dane willing to pay it? Also from Marvel and out next week is Ultraman, The Trials of Ultraman number 3, written by Kyle Higgins and Matt Groom with art by Francesco Manna. In this issue, it turns out that the forces aligned against the USP and Ultraman are far more widespread and more organised than our heroes had ever suspected. If they're going to survive, they'll need a new ally of their own, and the man they're looking at just so happens to be one of the most powerful and influential people in the world. But what's his history with the USP, and why does he seem to have his own hidden agenda? Out next week from Boom Studios we have We Only Find Them When They're Dead number 6, written by Al Ewing with art by Simone DeMeo. In this issue, 50 years have passed since Captain Malik and the crew of the Vihan 2 embarked on their fateful mission, and the universe has changed in ways no one ever expected. Jason Hauser, one of the fated Vihan 2 crew, is now 71 years old and living a life on the razor's edge between the harvesters and the worshippers. But as those rival religious factions clash throughout the galaxy, Jason finds himself thrown into the centre of the chaos and forced to confront his tortured past. But the only people who can help Jason have their own secret agenda, one that may bring him face to face with Captain Malik in ways beyond comprehension. And finally, out next week from IDW Publishing is Star Trek Year 5 number 20. This one's bounced around the schedules for a bit, so hopefully this will be out this week. It's written by Brandon Easton with art by Sylvia Califano. If you want to find out some other comics that might be worth checking out, you can always have a look at our On the Radar feature on our Twitter feed and website on a Wednesday. Until then, back to the main show. Now, in a kind of semi-regular feature, we're going to take a look at some of the recent trailers for some of the big hits coming our way over the next couple of months. First up, we're going to talk about Army of the Dead, the new Zack Snyder movie that is coming to Netflix in the UK. Leigh and Matt, you've had a chance to have a look at this one. What did you think?
I'm so glad that they took every AAA game from the last 10 years and shoved them into one movie. It's like Call of Duty with zombies. So it's just Call of Duty Zombies, really, then. That's all I got from it.
And you got the grimy setting, and then, it's a little bit quirky. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's effectively post-apocalypse, and the main character has to put together like a crack team to break into a lockdown Vegas to get a large sum of money from one of the casinos and get out again before the government nukes it. So it's a bit of a sort of action comedy style thing. I got Resident Evil Extinction vibes from it, not especially the scene in Vegas, obviously, but I don't know about this one. I think it probably isn't one that I'm going to jump out and watch straight away. I think it's just very much of a muchness, really. It's another generic zombie film, loads of shooting, smart-ass characters, that kind of thing. It's just, there's not really a lot of it that I care about, to be honest.
I feel the same way, especially since my first thought was, oh good, it's zombies. We haven't seen this before.
No. They're better zombies. They've evolved, Leigh. They've evolved.
I mean, I must say, I was curious when I first heard about it, because I quite liked Snyder's kind of remake of Dawn of the Dead from a few years back, which was a straight remake. Not a straight remake, but an updated version of George Romero's classic Dawn of the Dead, which was kind of, it was a very serviceable movie. He kind of had updated some of the zombie attributes to kind of make them more contemporary to what people like now, that they kind of run and do kind of parkour and whatnot. So what confused me is I've not really, other than the trailer, I'm like, is it connected to that movie? Is it within the same kind of logistical universe? But then I kind of found out that Tig Notaro is going to be in it as like a badass helicopter pilot, and I'm kind of like, yeah, I'm just going to watch it for that. I just want to see it come along and just be like a real badass. What's it? Because it's like, yeah, I'm just going to watch it for that. That's going to be the coolest bit. Like all these other big action heroes, and then you've got Tig coming in. So I hope she survives, but manages to also kick some ass.
Helicopter pilot. They tend to not do very well.
Don't say that. Don't say that.
Especially since Matt brought up Resident Evil vibes and Brad Vickers in the original Resident Evil, his fate,
I mean, it's coming to Netflix, so it would be kind of easy to just pop on a lazy Saturday afternoon or whatever it is, to blast through. So I'm kind of curious, and it means that Zack Snyder's getting to do kind of what Zack Snyder does, so outside of his DCU movies. I think he's going to be a little bit more playful with this. I imagine it'll just be the same kind of bombastic, colourful stuff that we would come to expect. But so, is it a watch or not watch from you two?
I mean, like you pointed out that it is on Netflix, so it's one of those things where you could put on so without too much commitment. But it's definitely not something I'd go out of my way to watch. I think part of it is, like you said, there is some confusion of whether or not initially if it's part of like the Dead series, like you said with Dawn of the Dead and all that. Is it part of that? Because usually if it's something of the Dead, it's from that series. But also I think there's the heist element confused me. It's like, you're doing a heist movie, zombie movie. What is this? I'm not sure. But like, I'm not sure how well those elements gel together. So,
I think for me it's going to be a not watch. But if I ever do watch it, it will be a hangover watch. The kind of thing you put on because you're dying and you just need something.
I'm gonna go with the watch camp just because I am curious about it, and like I said, I just want to see Tig Notaro just kick ass in this movie. So he's just so out of character for it. I'm looking forward to that completely. So the next movie we're kind of looking at seems like 12 months out of date, because I can remember seeing bus sidings with advertising this movie. But we've got The Quiet Place Part 2, which is coming out towards the end of this month, supposedly in theatres. But hopefully that will be the case. So are both of you clamoring to spend some quiet time with this movie?
Yes, in short. I really enjoyed the first one. Obviously, there was a lot of sort of competition between Bird Box and Quiet Place because they had largely similar premises, and I think Quiet Place did a really amazing job as a film. I was constantly really invested, like really on edge, and obviously a lot of that came from the complete lack of sound. I will be interested to see where it goes, and especially with the introduction of like the baby at the end of the Quiet Place, which was quite problematic, and you were just there being like, oh, how are they ever going to like keep it quiet? And just seeing how those kind of elements sort of play into the next film, which basically follows directly after the amazing sort of finale of the first one. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, I loved the first one. It was one of those movies that kind of shows the benefits of sound design, especially in horror, because the sound design is most of the time there is no sound, and every time that there is sound, it terrifies you because they set it up so well that like every bit of sound is a problem. And like you said, the scene with the baby in the original movie is just like, oh God. But yeah, like I'm very, very interested to see where they take it. I didn't actually consider like, oh yeah, the baby is going to be a massive problem, isn't it, going forward? Yeah. But yeah, I think the first movie was just such a good, like, tense horror movie that just did not let up with that tension for the entire time. And it'd be interesting to see where the second one goes with that. Although the trailer, admittedly, like does end with a lot more noise than that film should have in.
Yeah, I didn't unfortunately see the first film in a theatre, in a cinema, which I think would have greatly enhanced it. I saw it on Blu-ray a few months later in the house, which I think detracted a little bit from a lot of the tension that would have been built up in a cinema while everybody was like holding their breath and waiting for things to go. And again, it played well with the idea of keeping the alien presence quite distant for quite a long time. Didn't really get to see, so that was, didn't play too much in. I'm not quite sure if they can keep up that in this second film, the idea that we're doing some flashbacks, so we're kind of seeing the initial stages of the invasion. It's like, is it just going to be a little bit too broad now, and there's going to be lots of moments where there's more noise, the tension's not as palpable as it was before? But then they do run into a character played by Cillian Murphy, who's always good value whenever he turns up on screen. So I'm kind of interested to see what they do with that. It looks as if they're keeping the cast again quite tight, and it's not going to be a lot of characters in. But yeah, I think the idea of the baby being there, could be a potential problem for them in this. But they did find some things out at the end of the last movie, so whether they'll kind of play up on that knowledge as well, should be quite interesting. But I kind of think if I do get to see this one, I would like to see it in a cinema, just purely because of that immersive sound and being in the dark and everybody else kind of being in the same boat.
And someone moves on the other side of the room and it's
But I think it's that. So I never saw it in the cinema, but yeah. I think that would be giving me more stress. Is I can tell someone's eating some Haribo like right over there, and it's just like I can't, because I'm also too polite and too British to say anything, so I will just sit there and stew.
Seething. If we were in the world of the Quiet Place, you'd be toast now. It'd be like, serve yourself.
The one person who hasn't turned their phone off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with this one again, do you think it's going to be a worthwhile seeing?
Definitely.
I'm definitely interested.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there's plenty in this one to keep everybody interested in. So if you do get a chance to get to the cinemas at the end of this month, Quiet Place Part 2 does seem like well worth a trip. We're kind of pushing over to the small screen briefly for our next trailer, which probably a lot of people are looking forward to seeing. It comes out on June the 9th now, after a nice special announcement trailer from a bloke called Tom Hiddleston. Apparently he's quite famous. But this is the next big Marvel TV series after WandaVision and the Falcon / Captain America and the Winter Soldier. Spoilers there for anybody who's not seen it. So this is his headlining series, Loki. Any thoughts on this trailer?
Me personally, I am looking forward to it. I think it's going to be another WandaVision kind of style for me, where I think Loki's a really interesting character, and the plot of it is basically time dilation and timelines, that kind of thing. So I think it may get a bit meta, but I think it's going to be a positive kind of meta, if that makes sense, like kind of like Deadpool kind of meta, and fourth wall breaking and that kind of thing. So I am looking forward to it quite a lot.
Well, obviously it's a Marvel thing, so I'm like, well, no, I don't really fancy watching the million other things associated with it, although there were definitely parts of that trailer where I was getting a Control vibe, and I was like, don't do this to me. The sort of shadowy agency that's overseeing time stuff is the vibe I was getting off of it, and I was just like, that is kind of my thing. And the problem is, it's like Loki's the problem, though, because it's like I know that it's going to tie in with all the other MCU stuff, and it's going to be confusing for me on that respect, and not confusing in the way that these things are supposed to be.
You could just watch all the Marvel movies beforehand, Leigh,
Oh,
just to fill yourself in.
Because I've got better things to do.
It's just a big conspiracy for Marvel just to get you hooked in.
They've heard that Leigh hasn't watched many of the Marvel movies, and they go, how can we do it? Let's put a bit of control into our trailer. Get him that way. I mean,
it's even kind of the lighting is kind of similar as well at times. I'm just like,
I'm very much like Matt. I'm kind of really looking forward to this one. Up until kind of these Marvel shows, my favorite superhero TV show was Fox's Legion, which was just brilliant, an absolutely phenomenal tour de force of filmmaking, and it was weird and strange and bizarre, and this has got a lot of that kind of weirdness vibe going on, and this idea of him being tasked by the Time Variance Authority to help fix the timeline just looks like an opportunity to kind of really push the boundaries of what Marvel have been doing and kind of do some interesting stuff, and either retcon. It'd be an interesting way that they could do some kind of bizarre retconning of things or setting things up. But I'm also just really, really excited of watching Owen Wilson and Tom Hiddleston bounce off each other, because I do quite like Owen Wilson's slightly sardonic delivery in whatever film he's in. So I'm kind of like, yeah, if we can get a bit of like Wes Anderson feel into this.
I mean, also, like, are we going to get the iconic Owen Wilson? Wow.
That was actually my initial reaction to seeing him in the trailer. Wow.
Yeah, he's going to channel his Hansel from Zoolander, which would be the best thing for it. But I think it's good because it looks so different to WandaVision, and it looks so different to Falcon and Winter Soldier, and it's kind of like.
I think it's that because it's Marvel, but it's off the beaten track Marvel, and that's kind of what I was saying with WandaVision, where it's not your stereotypical Marvel program, and I think with the setting and the character himself, who is incredibly unpredictable, incredibly unreliable, that kind of thing. That's where sort of the intrigue comes from. I think it promises to be quite an interesting series.
Yeah, I mean, and kind of some of the kind of leaks that they've had over the time of like certain characters or actors that are going to pop up, and you kind of go, just how are they going to work that in? But it's with the thing with the logo, the way they kind of use different types. There seems to be hints and clues to what we could expect just in the typography they've used in the title. So I'm kind of looking forward to them maybe playing with some of the comic tropes that we've had with Loki in the comics, because Loki as a character in the comics has quite a lot of variations. So I'm kind of hoping they might do some things that kind of tie into Loki's history within the comics as well. But I'm really looking forward to this one. Can't wait for the 9th of June to come round. So it's a watch from me. Matt, Leigh?
Watch from me, yeah.
If they could do more standalone things, like I've said before, like if Marvel did more standalone things, I probably would watch this. But because it all ties in with superhero movies that I find incredibly tedious, then no, I will not watch it.
I think you should watch it, and then each week you could just like report on how confused you are by the end of it. just whether after 6 episodes you're just utterly confused beyond belief, or whether you've gone, oh, okay, this is all right. I've now watched the rest of the movies. I don't think we're going to get that far, but yeah, I think if you're a fan of the Marvel movies and you've enjoyed the previous 2 series that have been on Disney Plus, I think this is definitely one to keep an eye out for. And our final trailer for this time round is an interesting new movie based, I believe, on a video game. Not that I've played it, and it's called Werewolves Within. Matt, Leigh, any more info on that? Have you any knowledge of the original game?
Yeah. Sorry, you go first, Leigh.
I don't know much about like Werewolves Within as a game, but like before we recorded, Matt mentioned it's sort of like the werewolf deduction game, so like the actual like physical game, and I could see all the mechanics of that game in that trailer. Just straight away, like, oh yeah, someone's getting killed at night, and then like everyone in a room being suspicious of each other. I'm like, okay, but I'm really curious as to how any of that's going to translate to an actual story, because part of the way that game works is that it's always going to be something different. It's always going to be someone different in that room, and it kind of naturally evolves off the mechanics sort of thing. So
yeah, I mean, so what grabbed me straight away was the Ubisoft logo. So it's based on the Ubisoft VR game called Werewolves Within, which is in itself based on the social deduction card game called Werewolves. And the game itself, I haven't played, obviously because it's VR, but it's received quite a decent amount of praise. I think it's like the 9th. It's perceived as like the 9th best PSVR game. But exactly what you just said, Leigh. It's the game itself is social deduction, and the fun of it as well is when you play with your friends, and you're there being like, you're a werewolf, even though you have no proof, just because you want to wind them up, that kind of thing. It's all about sort of the characters. So I think the film, I'm interested, but I am almost definitely sure it's going to be rubbish, because I think to pull off this kind of concept, you need to really give the characters a lot of screen time, a lot of time for us to really like them, to then be like, oh my god, who is the werewolf? And it would be interesting to also see if any of the other mechanics carry over. So in the original game, people have different roles. For example, you have like 1 or 2 werewolves, you have the villagers, and then you have special roles who can do certain things at certain times to kind of narrow down who might be the werewolves. So it'd be interesting to see if that kind of translates into it as well, or if it doesn't. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting one because it's not a big property, and it's unusual to kind of have a movie based on a fairly kind of unknown kind of video game thing. But I think what won me over after watching the trailer, and I had to look at the official website, was the poster for it is absolutely brilliant. It's a little knitted werewolf with what looks like a scarf on, and it's like I want the knitted werewolf. It's too cool. But you know, the poster doesn't really give anything away. I mean, I don't think if you knew it was a video game if you didn't know it was a video game adaptation, you certainly kind of wouldn't pick that up kind of the poster. And if it hadn't have been for the Ubisoft logo at the beginning, it's kind of like it doesn't seem like your typical video game movie, really. And kind of because it's based on a VR experience game, it's kind of like, well, it seems a strange choice to adapt.
I mean, the thing that stands out to me, you saying that like it's an odd property to develop. I think if you were going to pick any social deduction game to base a movie on, it would be Among Us in terms of just sheer numbers, because it is kind of fundamentally the same idea of just like someone is killing off everyone else and everyone else has to figure out who it is. And although I will confess that like I'm not a massive fan of the original Werewolf game, but I really like Among Us, and I think it is because of like you said, it is basically just you point to people without proof and just go, "You're the werewolf," because you want to wind them up. And it's like, I don't like that about Werewolf, because it's just like you really are just throwing wild accusations around and just hoping that something comes together half the time. And I that's a problem for me with that game. But you know,
it does seem like werewolves are on the rise again in terms of appearing in films. There's been a few kind of like fairly low budget indie movies that have featured werewolves coming out in the last year or so, and I must admit I do have a soft spot for a werewolf movie. So I'm kind of curious about this. I don't think I'll go out of my way to see it at the cinema, but certainly if it ends up on one of the streaming platforms or is relatively easily, I can rent it on iTunes or something, I might give it a go.
It'll probably be a Uplay exclusive, knowing you.
Yeah, or in some kind of exclusive tie-in with it's going to be back projected on one of the walls in the next Assassin's Creed game or something. They want a bit of that Fortnite tie-in.
Well, they're going free. You're going free to play with a lot of games now. So like the next Tom Clancy game, like you've got to get to a certain room and you can unlock the movie.
So
just to try and get people to play Tom Clancy game.
So based on the trailer alone, really, is it a watch or not watch?
I mean, I'm curious. I don't have high hopes for it, so it's more kind of but I'm not expecting much. So let's see how it goes, kind of thing.
I'm the same. It's a watch.
It's mostly just curiosity as to how those mechanics are going to come together into a narrative.
If they do, or if it just turns into another sort of like terrible, loads of random people getting killed, you don't really care about them film.
Yeah.
I think I'll give it a try if it pops up on one of the services that I've got access to. But if it doesn't work for me, I've always got Super Mario Bros to watch, so that'll be good.
The best video game movie.
So
the best worst video game movie.
And that wraps us up for this edition of Trailer Talk.
Hello and welcome to the portion of the show where I talk about my games of the week. Last week there was one game out which made it pretty easy to pick, and it was Resident Evil Village, or Resident Evil 8, depending on how you want to call it. Already attracting attention due to its tall vampire lady antagonist, RE8 looks set to be a blend of RE7's first-person close-quarters horror and RE4's dingy European village setting, with werewolves and sexy vampire women. Reviews are generally pretty good, although complaints about the lack of zombies and its relatively short length imply those making the complaints have never played a Resident Evil game beyond the halfway point before. Instead, it looks like more of Capcom's particular brand of slightly campy horror is present, and it should be a game worth checking out. This week, Game of the Week is 100 Days Winemaking Simulator. A relaxing game where you run a winery, it looks set to be a solid mixture of card battler and management sim mechanics. Using randomly generated cards that determine what you can do each turn, you can try and Tetris new crops into your limited plots, or use cards to perform actions like ploughing, harvesting, and bottling. It looks like a relaxing yet still challenging time, and the colourful art style makes it stand out. And now, back to the main show.
So now we're going to take a look at something we don't usually have a look at on the Geeky Brummie podcast, but we're going to check out some geek books that we're going to recommend you seek out and give a try. So first up, we're going to go over to Leigh. Leigh, what's your book of choice?
Okay, so I was having a look through what I've read, and I ended up picking a series of books. So there's actually got two of them, and it is the Nursery Crime series by Jasper Fforde, and it is basically detective novels, but set in a world where nursery rhymes are real. So I believe that the big over easy is about the cases. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and someone is responsible, and now Jack Sprat needs to find him, and that's what's going on in it. And it is just, it's very, very silly as a concept, but it also works really well, and it leans into the silliness of its own concept. It's very comedic. It's very and it really sort of plays into a lot of the sort of nursery rhyme tropes, and it's interesting because having played Wolf Among Us probably a few weeks ago as well, it's sort of similar, but while the Wolf Among Us is a lot more noir, I'd say that this is kind of leaning more into sort of the kind of Discworld Hitchhiker's Guide style of writing, where it's kind of playing with the tropes and just being very silly with it as well. And yeah, I've only read one other book in the other series that Jasper Fforde does, which is the Thursday Next series, which is sort of a similar concept where it's investigations, but it's the world is all literary, so all literature exists in this world as real, but it's also exists with it's a story. It's a series that can only exist as a book because of how it works. We actually use the actual written page to tell the story, and there's elements of that in this too. And it has been a while since I've read through these two, but they are very, very good books, and they stood out to me when I was looking at my bookshelf. As recommendations.
So, I guess in terms of genre, it's sort of detective thriller comedy kind of thing.
It's very detective thriller, but it's got those comedic elements running through it all the time, and it's just it's just playing on those, drawing from these nursery rhyme tropes, and just it's very cleverly done.
I love those kind of books when they mess with sort of established canon, because I think you have to be very skilled and very good at what you do to be able to actually make more content out of something that's already established without,
It manages to get that balance right, I would say, from what I remember of it. So
yeah, I'd read the Thursday Next series of books, which I found very, very a great read, some real nice stuff in there. And I'd seen those ones on the bookshelves, and I've not actually got around to reading them. So I think I will actually go and seek that series out now. There we go. Have you got a book, Matt?
I do. However, I love it so much, I lend it out to people. I didn't realise. So I'm going to show a image of it. But it is David Gemmell's Legend. So David Gemmell is was a fantasy writer, and Legend is his first book, and he's quite revered as a fantasy author for a lot of sort of his writing style, but also a lot of the tropes as well. Legend is about a small sort of defense, which is the only way into this larger region called the Draenei, and they're under attack from this never-ending army of tribesmen who are basically trying to break through into their region, and they've got no support really, other than this one old warrior called Druss the Legend, and he's in his 60s, he's close to death, but he's had a long history of being this insane warrior, and so they've got him to come and defend them. And I think what I like about this novel, and the reason why I'd recommend it, is because David Gemmell himself, he originally started writing this book because he got diagnosed with cancer and he was going for screening to see if it was terminal, and he turned that into the premise of this book, where effectively it's one force against unreasonable odds and there's no hope of winning. And you can really see that in the writing and the characters. An underlining theme is there isn't really any hope for this siege. It's a lost cause. They are going to lose at some point. And it's interesting how he's taken that premise and he's managed to really run with it. And it kept me reading it. I stayed up all night. I think when I first read it, and I was like 14, 15, I stayed up all night. And then after I'd finished the book, I just sat there for a couple of hours like, wow, this is amazing. And it's one of the things that kind of got me into writing, because even though on the surface it's written in the 80s, it's quite a sort of like fantasy novel of its era, so it's a lot of like big muscly men and, you know, busty maidens, that kind of thing. It's quite those kind of tropes. It's also the way it's written is really fantastic, and you can see almost his fears and his sort of like hopelessness going through the book. But the way it ends as well, really unexpected, really well done. And there's a lot of light-hearted moments as well, which is really unexpected. So yes, David Gemmell, legend. It's quite cheap on Amazon. Pick it up, give it a read.
It's not a book that I've had on my radar at any point. Although Gemmell as a writer, I've kind of been aware of, and a lot of people have had, like, you know, a lot of positive thoughts. So it's just not a writer I've kind of come across. So I might have to give him a try now.
Yeah, I think because I was recommended his book. They said if you like fantasy, start with him. He's a very good starting place, and I do see that. It is quite an entry-level fantasy, but his subsequent books, you could tell his writing style has got a lot more developed, and I guess a lot of people would say some of his better books are his later ones, but this I think just for the fact of it's a perfect example of someone who is writing for a purpose, they're writing for a passion, and they're channeling all of their energy into this narrative and these characters. It's really, really well written as a piece of literature, whether you're a big fantasy fan or not.
I have picked a book as well, which is kind of a strange choice. I think people might know this author from other novels like Chocolat or The Lollipop Shoes, but quite a few years ago, she wrote two books, one called RuneScape and one called RuneLight, which kind of had contemporary versions of Norse gods. But I've picked a book she wrote about 8 years ago, which is called The Gospel of Loki. And this is officially her first young adult novel, even though the kind of Rune Marks and RuneLight books kind of fell into that trope, but they stuck the M in to kind of make it that this is a kind of more kind of fantastical writing. But this is kind of a bit of a standalone novel. It takes place about 500 years before the Rune series. But what's great about this is it's the gospel according to Loki, and it's Loki kind of taking all the slander that's been told about him for the past 500 years as this, you know, he's this awful trickster god who does all these terrible things, and kind of goes about setting the record straight about, you know, how he was recruited by Odin, you know, his involvement in the rise and fall of Asgard, his imprisonment through no fault of his own, and then kind of his ultimate involvement in Ragnarok, and it's kind of cool because it plays with the kind of established tropes of that, and I think was kind of written at a point when kind of people were just getting into that kind of like Marvel version of the character, but this is much more in the true traditional Norse version of him, and it's surprising how much that this plays off as like a real kind of lightweight, fun, exciting novel, even though it draws very much on the true Norse myths and the whole mythology of what's going on. But it's written in a way that's really accessible. I think the young adult label probably does a little bit of a disservice. People might be expecting something more along the lines of kind of like your Harry Potters or whatever it is. But there's something about Joanne Harris's writing that I just find really nice, really lyrical. She's got a really good way with words, and she's very good at using these kind of mythology settings to say a lot about kind of the world we're living in and how we interact with it, particularly in the Rune series. That's much more at the forefront about how these gods have fallen out of favor as time goes on. But it's if you've any interest in kind of the Norse myths and the Norse mythology, then this book you could kind of read as a standalone. It kind of fills in about a bit of the backstory that you get later on in the kind of Rune series, but it's definitely something that if you're kind of into kind of the trickster god, it's definitely worth picking up. I've really enjoyed the whole series, the 3 books. It's one that I'm hoping she returns to again at some point, because it is a really entertaining read.
That actually sounds like something I might have to check out at some point.
So, sort of interesting question. In terms of the Norse mythology aspect, is it one of those where if you didn't really know a lot about Norse mythology, but you quite like the sound of the book, you could still pick it up and you wouldn't be too left, or would you need a bit of knowledge?
No, you wouldn't need any foreknowledge of the actual Norse mythology. What's nice about it is that it's not written in a kind of like old world style. Loki comes across as a very 21st century character who's kind of just recanting the rewriting the lies that have been told about him over the years. So it's very accessible in that way. You kind of, you might have some idea of who Thor, Odin, Loki, and the rest of the kind of the Norse gods are, but you don't really need to have any other kind of foreknowledge of that. It's written in such a way that makes it very accessible, and makes the characters very contemporary, even though it's talking about kind of a historical period. But it's kind of that reflection back. It's a real nice read of like, and at times it's kind of difficult to kind of not hear Tom Hiddleston's voice in your head reading Loki's voice, but I think that kind of adds to it as well a little bit in a way. You kind of like you have an insight into him as this kind of, he's an anti-hero in a sense. He's kind of like, he does some things, but he's trying to get by in the world. It's a rough time being the adopted son of a god, with a red-haired brother who kind of like takes all the thunder. which is kind of like it's really good, and I do think if you are interested in that kind of thing, this and the Rune series does some really interesting stuff with those characters. Really brings them into the kind of modern world. I've read Neil Gaiman's Norse Myths, which is much more of a standard retelling of the Norse mythology, much more of kind of like almost like a straight translation in the tradition of Beowulf and stuff, whereas this is much more kind of like, how would these characters be if they were still around today? And it makes it very accessible, and it is fun. And I do have a lot of love for kind of Norse mythology. There's a lot in that I kind of connect to in terms of how the characters work, how they interact, and the kind of whole way that Norse sensibility, the whole Asgard, and kind of the various levels of gods that they have work. So it's a real good read, and I think young adult or old adult, it's definitely a book that you should give a try.
Cool.
So I think that wraps up our look into a few books that might be worth checking out. If you have any other geek reads that you think people should be checking out, then do let us know either through our Facebook page or drop us a tweet on Twitter. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Geeky Brummie Podcast. I'd like to thank Leigh and Matt for joining me. But before we go, Matt, how can people find you online?
You can find me at Mr. Matt Lovell on Twitter, where I mostly post things I think are funny and no one responds. You can find me on the Geeky Brummie Twitter handle as well on a Monday, where I take over the Twitter and talk mostly about esports and a couple of other things going on. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Mr. Matt, at matchstick_Matt. Sorry.
Leigh, where can we find you?
You can find me on YouTube at Bob the Pet Ferret, and you can find updates for that YouTube on Twitter at Bob the Pet Ferret, and my personal Twitter is The Cheap Ferret. It's also supported by Patreon, which is, again, Bob the Pet Ferret. You can also find me doing the weekly gaming roundup on geekybrummie.com, with Matt providing the esports news, covering the latest news and releases and the game of the week for every week. And yes, I think that's everywhere you can find me. What about you, Keith?
Well, you can find me on Twitter at hardlook_. No, I don't even know my own brand now.
Underhorse.
Yeah,
Underhorse.
Neither do I. It's fine.
Yeah, hardlook_hotel without the underscore on Instagram. And then on Wednesdays, via the various Geeky Brummie feeds, the website and the Twitter, talking about the latest comics that are out. And although he's not with us this week, you can keep tabs on Mr. Parrish via his Twitter feed at Ryan Parrish, or if there's food-related stuff going on, I don't know if MasterChef's right on now, you can find him on Brummie Gourmand. But you can find all of us online and on Twitter and on Facebook if you just search for Geeky Brummie. So that brings us to the end of this particular issue. I will hope you've had a good time, as much as we've enjoyed ourselves. And if you can, please do follow, like, share, tell your friends about us, send us gifts. Let us know what else you'd like to hear us talk about in the coming weeks. If there's anything you've seen, heard, or done that you think we should be aware of, please drop us a line. But that's it for now. So don't forget to join us on our next issue. But for now, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.